So let's be honest, you can never have too many miniatures painted in a rainbow theme, right? So I wanted to try and paint something a little bit different for Pride Month, and I wanted to paint something obviously in the colors of the rainbow, but I also wanted to use a different technique to what I'm usually doing. So I took a look at the Van Gogh tank that I painted a while back, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do something, well, not similar, but something just as fun and creative, just with rainbow colors. And so that is how this model came to be. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I painted it. So first off, I started with a model that's been primed using the White Scars primer from Citadel, and then I do a really quick wet blend with some contrast paints also from Citadel. The red one is Blood Angels Red and the orange is Gryph-hound Orange. And as you probably noticed, the tank is going to be covered with a bunch of textures later on. So this is just to get an idea of where I want the colors to be placed, like a roadmap for the colors later on. So this doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be smooth or anything. It is just to give myself an idea of where the colors are gonna go. Then the yellow one here is Yandan Yellow, and I tried to work relatively quickly just to do a wet blend so that it would actually work. But you don't have to be quick about this. It is going to be covered later on anyway, so it's not very important at all. And you can see here, this is very rough and the wet blend is, well, it's not great, let's be honest. But I think I painted the entire surface of this tank in about, it took me about 5 minutes to get the entire surface covered with this wet blend in 6 different colors, so I think that's okay. The blue one here is Talazar Blue, and I think if you don't have contrast paints or you don't have any sort of liquid paints so that you can do wet blending, it doesn't matter much. You can use any sort of paints, just get some colors down to give you an idea of where you want the textures to be added on. Then the purple one here is Lokshan Purple, and then lastly I add a little bit of Volupus Pink, which is my it is one of my favorite contrast paints just because it's pink, and I always try to add that and if I can. And I thought, of course, I know that a rainbow sort of technically ends with like violet colors, but a little bit of pink never hurt anyone, right? Once the contrast paints were all dry, I started laying out my wet palette, and at first I wanted to paint the reddish part of the rainbow, and you'll notice I have all sorts of different colors laid out here on my wet palette. I have some browns, I have some orangey tones, I have some bright reds, and I also have a dark blue color, and that's because I thought if I keep them all to exactly the same type of color, like the same hue, it'll be slightly boring, and so I think the dark blue will add a little bit of visual interest. And then I use, as you can see, this is a really cheap brush. I don't know where I have it from, and it's just a flat square brush, and I paint on the paint. I put it on relatively thickly on the brush, and then I just use alternating like horizontal and vertical strokes, just putting on some paints, playing around with the textures, playing around with dark colors and light colors. And I definitely try not to be too careful about what I'm doing. I just play with it, have fun, try to be creative, and just enjoy the painting process itself. So now I have just sped up the video speed a little bit, just because otherwise it would take quite a long time for you to watch me paint the entire thing. And I've also cut it so that you don't have to do that. But I wanted to show you quite a few of the painting strokes just to give you a sense of how I build up the texture. And I think with something like this, I haven't done this on a miniature ever before, so it's not like I'm an expert on this technique when it comes to miniature painting, but I have used it in acrylic paintings like 10 years back or something. And I think it works best if you take your time to build up your layers and are not afraid of stark colors, are not afraid of contrasts, and are also quite conscious of having visible brush strokes, because I think that is really what adds a lot of the visual interest to the piece. And also sometimes you just need to wait a little while for layers to dry, otherwise you will get the colors blended too much, which is of course often what we go for in miniature painting, like really smooth blending. But that's not really what makes this technique fun and interesting, I think. So try not to go for smooth blends. Try to go against your instinct as a miniature painter, and just go with the broad brush strokes, go with visible brush strokes, go with a little bit more paint on the brush, because if you just add too little, it'll be too subtle, and I don't think subtlety is, well, that is not what works here at all, as you can probably tell. If you think it works at all, you might just think it looks horrible, which is also completely fair. And you'll also notice I built up my wet palette, and there's a reason why it's constantly in the picture. That's because I want you to see how I build up the colors, and how I mix and match, and also how I continuously go back and forth. So now that I'm painting the yellow, for instance, I don't mind going back and using some of the orange paints or some of the red paints, because again, I want to build up layers, and I want it to look like they are integrated into each other, so that the orange and yellow are integrated, and the red and yellow is also a little bit integrated, so that you don't just get like really stark transitions from one color to the next. And it just takes a little bit of patience, but actually this is a really fast way of painting a surface such as this. I think for painting the entire side of the tank with this technique and these colors, it took me about an hour. So, I mean, that is really quick. And then of course I, touched up some details and stuff later on. So it ended up taking more than just 1 hour. But the basic sort of baseline of the model was painted in an hour. I'm not going to give you all the paints I'm using here, just because there are a whole bunch of colors, but also because it doesn't really matter. If you want to recreate something like this, or try something different just with a couple of colors, or just a few hues yourself, just use whatever colors you have. I don't think the exact color really matters that much. What I think matters is that you have enough different colors to create visual interest, and to create layers and texture. So if you only had like 2 different green colors, perhaps that wouldn't be quite enough, but then you could obviously just mix them with some yellows and some blues and some whites and some browns and stuff, and get all the colors you want. So I'm just using the colors I have available to me, and if there was something that I felt I needed, I would have just mixed them up. And again, you'll notice I just used the exact same method, these broad, vertical, horizontal strokes, and I try not to be afraid to mess it up. So just try stuff, do some strokes that are perhaps just really bright green, and then it looks, oh, that's too much, but it's okay. I mean, this is about adding layers, so I'll just go back over them with different colors later on. It doesn't matter at all. It's just a fun creative process, and I think trying something like this, even though you might not particularly enjoy this look or feel that it's perhaps appropriate for miniatures, it could just be a fun way of experimenting with techniques and colors and texture, and perhaps you'll come up with something different, but that you think is just a really cool and fun way of painting. I think looking back at the painting process now, I think that I should have laid out all the colors from the beginning, because laying them out as I sort of get to that section on the model means that I haven't really included any of the later colors on the first stages. So I haven't really used a lot of light blue, for instance, in the reddish part of the model, and I didn't include blue in the green and so on, and didn't include a lot of green in the orange, and I think that was perhaps, I won't say it was a mistake, because as I said, you can always go back and fix it, but I think if I were to do it again, I would lay out all the colors from the beginning to make sure that I could really integrate them into each other and into the different types of textures. I also found that the less fluid the paints are, the better they work for something like this. And so it felt a little bit counterintuitive to use a wet palette, but miniature paints just dry out so fast that if I had laid them all out from the beginning, not on a wet palette, I wouldn't even have gotten like 10% of it done before all the paints were already dry. So even though it feels a little bit strange, try not to thin your paints if you want to experiment with this technique, because it is the texture left by the visible brush strokes that really carries the overall look and feel of this model. Once the base colors of the rainbow were down, I decided to go back over some of the surfaces with colors that were not originally included in each section. So for instance, here I'm adding a little bit of purple to the green and the red. And the reason for that is that I thought that each section looked really nice, but slightly boring. And I thought it needed something to sort of disrupt the nice look of just each section on its own. So I wanted something that could contrast a little bit, add something that would be a little bit more visually interesting and a little bit more challenging to the eye, so that you can't just take a quick glance at this and then you've seen everything there was to see about it. You have to just have a little bit more patience and explore the texture slightly more, if that makes sense. I wanted the guns on the side to have the same sort of texture, and I tried painting them with the original brush, but it just looked like a big mess. This brush was simply too big. So I took another one of my very cheap brushes and I just used a pair of scissors and cut it so that I had a smaller, still flat and square brush to use. Don't say there isn't any use for really cheap brushes in your painting arsenal. Then, because with this painting technique I had just painted over all of the details on this model, so you can't really see what's what, I decided to go back over it with a bit of black lining, and for that I used some black contrast paint. This is Black Legion, and I tried to just fairly neatly recreate all of the details that were otherwise slightly lost. And the reason for this is both that I think it makes the model a little bit easier to understand. You can actually see what's what. But I also think it is a nice contrast with these straight, thin black lines just put up against the sort of messiness of all the paints. And I think that just, again, adds a little bit of visual interest and make the colors stand out even more than they already do. Lastly, I decided to paint the edge of the tank just with a pure black paint. This is again the Black Legion contrast paint, both because I wanted it to sort of match the Van Gogh tank, and also because I think adding different colors or more texture to this wouldn't add anything. On the contrary, I think it would detract from the visual impact of the painting on top of the tank. So just a pure black to make it nice and simple, and almost use it as a sort of a frame for the painting. And then I also used a quick edge highlight using a Canoptic Alloy, a bright silver paint, to again help with the readability of the model, so that it's really easy to see where the edges are. And again, because I think it looks nice and adds a little bit of quietness almost to the frame, that is a nice contrast to the chaotic mess of colors on top of the tank. So this is what it looks like when it's done, and here you can see it next to the Van Gogh half of the tank. Of course, these two types of painting, they don't really match per se. It's not the same technique at all, but it's both of them represent like some fun I had with experimenting with colors and technique, and I'm actually quite happy with it now. I just need to figure out how to paint the sort of middle of the tank, if I can find some way of painting it that would make these two halves go together somehow. I'm not sure. Otherwise, it was just fun to paint. So anyways, this is the final result, and I am really curious to see what you guys think. Do you think this works? Do you think it looks awful? Do you think there is room for experimenting more with this type of painting technique? I would really like to try it out on a smaller model, like a Space Marine or something, and perhaps not with these exact colors. You can use all sorts of colors, obviously, for this type of technique. But it would just be fun to try it out and see what happens, and if it could perhaps work as some sort of camouflage pattern. And then it's a little bit silly, but some of the colors I used were fluorescent, so the tank will glow slightly under UV light. And as you can see, mostly where it's green, because somehow I seem to have happened to end up using quite a lot more fluorescent green than any of the other fluorescent colors. But this is just silly. It has no practical value, but if you can do a UV shot of your model, then I will always take the chance to do it. It's just fun. I don't want to do a whole rant, but just before I finish off this video, I would just like to say that I know that some people don't like rainbow themed models, for instance, in Warhammer 40,000, and they say, please keep politics out of our hobby. And to that, I just want to say that to me, LGBTQ rights and Pride Month has nothing to do with politics. It's about human rights, and I think there should be a space for that in any hobby. Also, on a personal note, I'm a woman married to another woman, so this is, of course, just part of who I am and part of my day-to-day life, and I don't think that is political either. So there you go. Just wanted to mention that before I get any comments about that. And before you leave, I would, as always, like to take the opportunity to thank the wonderful people who support Dice and Demons over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Thomas Madsen, Gwenael, Jordan Hollands, Queen's Wolf, Double J's Terrain, Mola, Steve Eberly, Nassim Makaya, Andrew Correa, Anthony Paul Castro, Bosworth the Rogue, Mando Project, Starcon85, S. Bear, Iconocicus, Elliot Philby, Cyber Fossil, Cinnamon Coffee 87, Terrainery, Joshua and Anya Pavelsic, Charlie Robertson, and VT Knight 007. I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the show notes down below if you would also like to support Dice and Demons over there. If you want to stay updated on my painting projects, you can do so over on X, formerly known as Twitter, and on Instagram, and both places you'll find me as Dice and Demons. And I would also, of course, very much like to know what you think of this painting project, what you think of this type of technique, if you think it is a good idea. Do you have any suggestions for how you could use it in other places, for instance? Any sort of thing, comments, critiques, suggestions, questions, just let me know in the comments section and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!